G'day folks, welcome to this overview of Feudum. Feudum is a heavy Euro game designed by Mark Swanson with art by Justin Schultz and published by Odd Bird Games in 2017. Now it is in effect an action card selection and resource management game built around a very complex and immersive web of interrelated game elements. At its core, however, you're striving for these veneration or victory points, VPs. And there are many different ways to secure these, which thus facilitates many different paths to victory within the game. Now, the fundamentals of gameplay are surprisingly easy. It is a relatively easy game to teach, but a very difficult game to master and to win. So how does this all work? Well, everyone starts off with an identical deck of 11 cards. At the start of each turn, you simply select 4 of these 11 cards to play. You can play a Saltpeter to play a 5th card in your turn, or you can play a Sulfur, a yellow cube, to play 2 of your 4 cards consecutively. Now on your turn, when your turn comes around, you simply select one of those 4 or 5 cards that you've selected to play on your turn. And these are all relatively easy to grasp. The Migrate event simply brings a new pawn onto the board for you. The Move action simply lets you move your pawns. The Influence action lets you place an influence marker where you have a pawn. And ideally, you're using this to gain control of a space. The Improve action lets you improve a space where you have control. You can convert outposts to farms, farms to towns, or a town to a feudum. Once you have control, your actions expand. So if you control an outpost, the Explore action lets you draw Royal Wit cards, which can be endgame scoring bonuses or in-game bonuses. If you control a farm, the Harvest action lets you gather resources to that farm. If you rule a town, you can collect tax and gather more coins. But throughout all these, you're competing with other players, and the Conquer action lets you attack other players. But be careful, because they may have selected the Defend action, which boosts their defense. There's also a Repeat action, which lets you do most of the aforementioned actions a second time. And finally, there's the more complex Guild action, which, as the name suggests, lets you perform a range of guild actions associated with those 6 guilds around the edge of the board. Now, many of these actions can be upgraded to advanced actions if you meet the requirements, such as by having the right pawn character out on the board or being able to pay a resource requirement. But even those advanced actions are, initially, relatively easy to grasp. There's nothing too complicated in any of these actions and teaching them to new players. Many of these actions grant you an immediate VP benefit. When you improve a location, you gain VPs. When you conquer an enemy pawn or feudum, you gain VPs. When you do what's called a push or pull guild action, you gain VPs. At the same time, you may be setting yourself up for future glory. So you may be fighting other players for control of those guilds by trying to have the most what's called status stars associated with each guild. And those status stars are gained by doing those actions, such as placing a pawn matching the guild, or ruling a location that matches that guild, or ruling a feudum that matches that guild. If you have the most stars in that guild, you become guild master. Second most stars, and you're the journeyman. If you're playing with 4 or more players, a 3rd place will also be given to someone, and that's known as apprentice status. And when the epoch advances, you'll score points based on your status in each of those 6 guilds. At that time, you'll also score points based on landscapes and your active regions, basically where you've built across the board. And it's these guilds that complicate matters, because your status within a guild will change regularly. In fact, it has the potential to change several times between your action card plays. You may play a card to build a feudum, improving your status from journeyman to guildmaster and giving you lead status in a particular guild. But by the time your next turn comes around, if another player has perhaps conquered your feudum, or simply built a feudum for themselves and perhaps improved their locations to enhance their status stars in that guild, it's entirely possible that you no longer have any status in that guild whatsoever. And that constant changing of status stars and guild roles and associated actions with where you are in a guild means that the game state and what you can do and what others can do is constantly changing. One turn you may be planning to do a push action as guild master. The next turn you need to rethink your entire position on the board. Now, over the course of 5 epochs, with a variable number of play turns in each epoch and typically 4 to 5 cards per person in each turn, you'll have the opportunity to perform many actions throughout a typical game. So missing out on a few is no big deal. You simply roll with the punches, get back up again, and develop a new plan to gain those VPs as your focus. But of course, there are all these side considerations that you need to make. There may be monsters roaming the board that you need to contend with. You need to feed your pawns, so you may need to collect more food. You may need to collect a king's seal to activate your royal writ. You may need a rosary bead to enhance your harvest yield. You may need wood or iron to improve your locations through the improve actions, or you may need coins, so you need to sell your farm goods at the Farmers Guild. And that's just a small taste of all these extra little considerations that you're making to do those basic actions. So what does this all mean? It means that while you may have a perfect opportunity to do a guild action to score 5 veneration points, yay. At the same time, though, you're out of food, and so you have to travel to the Merchants Guild to buy those requirements to feed your people. Or it may be approaching the end of the game, and you need that King's Seal, but you're out of money, so you need to sell your farm goods to the Farmers Guild to collect the coins you need to activate that Royal Writ to give you the extra veneration points you need. And this is where I'm talking about this complex web of interrelated elements. All of this makes Feudum a remarkably dynamic game. Despite the fact that a lot can happen between your card plays, it all tends to happen pretty quickly. There's relatively low downtime for such a complex game. The game state is constantly changing. There are no front lines of your domain. You and your enemies are mingling and fighting and contesting for space and those status stars all over the place. For many, this may be a chaotic headache that burns their brain to the point of exhaustion. For others, it offers up a tasty smorgasbord of options that they will feast over. Given its depth, I feel that the base game alone is enough to justify a very high playability rating. But if that weren't enough, Swanson developed a series of small thematically oriented expansions that add extra little bits of flavour, like windmills and catapults, squirrels and conifers, seals and sirens, alter ego, and the Queen's Army. And that's just listing the ones that I own. There are many others as well. So do not be mistaken by the quirky, fascinating, and intriguing art of Feudum, which I love, by the way, into thinking that this is a light and comical stroll across a fantastic medieval landscape. It is, in fact, a heavy, quite intense, and long exercise for your brain. But if you're like me, that's exactly why you may love it. That is Feudum, designed by Mark Swanson, published in 2017.